welcome to the podcast, Denis Mavrokefalos.
Thank you. Great to be here.
No, it's really good to see you. So this is what it's all about, okay? What we want to do is explore kind of stories and insights of various people in the real estate and construction sector across the UK, Europe, and the US. And I know that you've had kind of legs in each camp over the last kind of 5-6 years, which is brilliant. But I suppose the purpose of it is to uncover how people found their way into the industry, the major influences and influencers in your career, as well as to get your insight into thoughts on future changes and, you know, across the real estate and construction sector. So I thought, let's start by you introducing yourself, what you do, how we know each other, and what you're doing now.
Okay, cool. So Denis Mavrokefalos, I'm currently the PMO lead for EMEA for JLL. I have been in the industry for 20 plus years, originally trained in South Africa and then moved over to the UK, and we can get into the detail. You know, I've moved around a bit. So what is that, 3 continents later? And I know Capstone very well because we've worked together as a candidate as well as a client. And I've always had a need for recruitment agencies within the UK market, and we're finding that need is spreading as the labour markets change. We're finding we need that elsewhere, and that's how we partner together and work together. So it's been a very, very good journey together for many, many years. Yeah.
It certainly has, and I think you work with most people across the business, which is always really, really good. So, and obviously you and I have thrown ourselves off a building abseiling together, which was, I had completely forgotten about that, by the way. That's so weird that you remembered that.
Yeah,
that was...
I've still got the photo. It was 30 something floors. I found that the walk up the stairs was more stressful than the climbing down. I think you had the opposite experience.
Yeah, I did.
But it was really nice, and I had a lovely lady supporting me. So she was very chatty, and you know, we had a good chat down the building. So you know, there you go.
Yeah, that's weird because the guy that I went down with, he did not have that experience with me because all he could hear was ringing in his ears after I was screaming. But it was great fun. Yeah. That was a Land Age event, I think, wasn't it? So tell us a bit about you, Denis. This is all about you and your thoughts and your background, but tell us about your background. How did you get into the real estate sector? Because obviously you were at university in South Africa, I think, weren't you?
That's correct. So it's a bit of an interesting journey. I don't know, I was 14, 15. At some point in school, we had to make decisions on what courses we wanted to do. As probably most kids at that age, I had no idea. So I went for a few aptitude tests, and the general feedback was likes numbers, doesn't like words, you know, so that halved the industry options, let's say. And I've always opted for the more technical side of things. I picked a bunch of courses in terms of school subjects that would facilitate more of the sciences side of life. And then I finished school. I went to a design college, did interior design because I was at the time, you know, maybe I am still, I don't know. I was good at drawing. So, you know, really got into the design aspects of it and loved it. But what I realized very quickly was I just wasn't a designer. I was good at technical drawing, good at all of that, good at solving problems, but the design aspect, you know, without sterilizing, I wasn't the flamboyant person who would walk into the room and own the design, and you know, it just wasn't my personality.
So you mean from a creative perspective?
Yeah. As a personality, I'm more just a sit behind the scenes and just get the job done. I wasn't the, you know, I've got this vision and we're going to build something. It just wasn't me. So I felt very early on that there were people in the course, colleagues, friends, whatever you want to call them, that were much better at that, and it just wasn't me. And I was like, I've got to do what, you know, follow my heart. So I built on what I had known, and I had a few friends who had done a construction management course and really loved their stories. So I went, did a bit more investigation, and I signed up for that. So I did a 4-year BSc honors, and I loved the course because we moved campuses. So when we did accounting, when we did tax, when we did chemistry, we did it with those departments. So none of the courses were our department doing it. So we landed up pretty much studying with every department across, apart from medical, every department. You know, the law was with the lawyers and the accounts was with the accounting teams. So I really got a massive flavor of what the bigger world looks like through that course. And when I finished, I went into project management. And I did that for a few years. My first job was massive. It was a large casino in South Africa. And I got the taste and I got hooked. I was like, I like being in a room with 20 people, problems that no one knows the answers to, but we get there. And enjoyed that for a while. And then at the time, my girlfriend, now wife, we picked the decision to go to London. We're both EU citizens at the time. This is pre-Brexit, long time ago. So we could just land and plug and play, and the market was buoyant. So I landed on the Sunday and I was working on Wednesday. Started with Leeds and then moved around a little. So I think one of the reflection points for me was I didn't have any family in the industry. So it wasn't like my dad. My dad was in insurance. So it was difficult in the beginning because of the network. You know, I didn't have an uncle who could open a door, worked at a developer, or whatever it was. So everything we did was through agencies because that was my way of getting into the market. I moved around a little in the beginning because we were still getting settled in London. The plan was 2 years. This was, I don't know, 2002, 2003. And, you know, we stayed there for 15 years. That's a short story.
Yeah.
And during that time, did my RICS, so became MRICS. Very, very, very valuable course. And I really, at some point, I wasn't a very good student when I was at school. I never really understood why I needed to do it. But once I grew up, let's call it, I realized the benefits. So I put everything into the MRICS program, and I came out feeling like a professional. I really felt like I'd grown up, and it was a good thing. But, you know, it's what you put in things. So for me, that was one point of put it all in and you get something out. And then using that, I started understanding more about the market, the roles and responsibilities of what we could do. And I shifted more into the QS side of things, so cost management. And again, that opens up your doors in terms of different clients, where you are at the table, etc. And I did that for a while. And then I was very fortunate in 2007 to go work for Goldman Sachs as a client. So it was the EMEA portfolio. It was expanding. Up till that point, it was very much South Africa and, let's say, local London projects. Now I was exposed to all of Europe, and I loved it. You know, again, it was that point of, wow, just very, very exciting. And delivered 17 countries while I was there for 6 years, changed roles 2-3 times. And I reflect back, and that was probably one of the, without insulting any of my previous, you know, bosses or employers, it was one of the most influential places to work. The basics, the principles, the way they run an organization, the culture, very hard, but there were some amazing, amazing lessons. So I walked away 2013 very tired but happy. And that's when I joined JLL, and I've been here for 9 years. And then within JLL, I've swapped roles. So I started in the occupier cost manager side. Within JLL, when I joined, there was a big gap in that we weren't doing any work outside of London, let's call it the UK, from a cost management perspective. So I started doing a lot more portfolio work. So rolling all the way back to my college days, understanding all the different disciplines, now I call them stakeholders, you know, now going to Goldman's and understanding and living with those stakeholders. Those are the people I went for lunch with every day, and now becoming a consultant. It all started finishing the loop. And once I was in any city, it didn't really matter, talking to a client, I got it quite quickly just because of my experience and, you know, maybe my openness to diversity in terms of I don't hear accents, I don't worry about languages, you know, I just get on with it, and it seemed to pay off. And then we left London in 2017 with JLL, moved to California, helped grow their cost management discipline in country. Was privileged to work on some amazing projects. One of the highlights was the Lucas Museum. So a big $1.3 billion scheme, saw it from the beginning. It hasn't finished yet, so I haven't seen the end yet. But when it does, I'll definitely make sure I get to go out. Got to meet, you know, Mr. Lucas himself. So that was amazing. Got to sign the steel that went in when they were busy doing the frames. So there was some real memorable moments there, but I worked in 11 states, including, you know, Hawaii, if we wanted to drop some names. And it was one of my goals in life, was to always build a hotel in Hawaii. I'm not sure why. And I managed to work on a project there. So very, very, very blessed. And then for family reasons, the West Coast, as awesome as it was just too far. So we moved back to EMEA. That's where this role came up. Took it over from a good friend, Karen. She was running it within the business, and was privileged to be able to pick where to work from. So we picked Lisbon. My wife's Portuguese, and we are now based in Lisbon doing program management across the globe. And it's been a bumper journey. So lots of lessons, lots of stories. So
that's amazing. So it's really interesting because you've got the program management, you've got the cost management, you've got client side, you've got consultancy side, you've got the UK, you've got the US. Now you're based in Lisbon, but obviously with an EMEA wide remit. So given that you've worked across client side and consultancy side and across all of these regions, you must have really been able to draw on many different people, many different leadership styles. And obviously you're now in a leadership position yourself. So what have you learned, whether it be cultural differences that you've drawn from and applied to your own style or not, as the case may be? So yeah, I'm really keen to understand all the lessons that you've learned around leadership and which bits you've taken as part of your style, because we're all sponges as we're kind of developing through our careers and learning what our innate style is, and then maybe building on some strengths that other people have that don't come as naturally. So what would you say have been your main influences, whether geographical or whether from a sector perspective, on your current leadership style and positioning?
I think to cop out, the simple answer is I've learned from all of it. So I think each sector runs work differently. So I'll give you an example. We did work for Sky, and everything they do is urgent. You'd swear it was breaking news, go, go, go. And having to adapt and work to their pace was a lesson. And once you've done that 2-3 times, which I've done now, when I meet a client, I always ask myself, where are you on that scale of who you are and what's important to you? So I think listening and trying to adapt and be responsive to your audience was probably a very, very important lesson. In terms of geography, all the places I've worked in are different. All the places have pros and cons. So without, damning or having HR get called because of my views of the politics, I would say I've got a blend now. It's a bit of an international flavor and it's a little bit of everything. So I like the American go-get attitude. I like the fact that when you ask for something, it comes within a day. I love the fact that Europe takes 2 weeks to answer it because there's lifestyle and other things involved. So there's a balance. But I think it's that responsiveness. It's that attention to detail and to care. So when someone asks you something, I need a proposal, I need this, I need help. I think just acknowledging that they've asked, and you may not know the answer, but giving them an answer. I don't know, but speak to this person. Let me connect you with this. I think network is really, really important, and sharing your network. I don't see it as a little secret black book. I just see it as lots of folk that I know. And if anyone I know can help someone else, I would hope we all just pay it forward and we just share. So for me, that's an important thing. If it takes 5 minutes of my day and saves you 2 days of work, then I've done a good job, and one day maybe that'll come back to me. But I do it because I love it and I care. I don't do it for the outcome. I think that's the other thing is, and maybe that's not a good thing, I don't know, but I do it for what I think are the right reasons. And, we had to have fun. We only get one chance at it, so we might as well enjoy it and do the best we can. I think from a corporate environment perspective, also learned a lot. So worked with British, worked with international as well as US-led, companies, and they've all got very different ways of working. And again, I've probably cherry-picked the bits. My personality, I'm very optimistic. So I think I just ignore the things I don't like. I think I just bob over them and I just move on to what I do like. And that's really become part of me. But when I look back at all the managers specifically that I've had, or the people that I have managed, I've learned either way, down or up. And for me, authenticity is important, being honest and open. We're not here to play games. Let's just, if there's a deal to be done, let's talk about it. And if it's not going to work out, say thank you, shake hands and, move on. If we make mistakes, we put our hands up. We say sorry, but then more importantly, we learn from it, but we fix it. So whatever we've done wrong, let's acknowledge it, let's own it, and let's take it forward. And And I think the people that I've worked with the best are the ones that gave me their time. The manager that, in my early days, they sat down and said, hey, I like your report, your minutes, whatever I'd done as an output. Let's go through it together. Don't just email me and say it's not so good. Tell me and spend time and invest. And that's where I've learned the most. And I try and do that a lot with the people that I work with. I'm also very flat and open with the way I work. So I don't fit in well with that hierarchical structure because I think we're all equal. I don't care if you've got 1 day of experience or 100. I think we've all got something valid to add, and it's just about bringing that together. So lots of lessons there. And then from each sector, hospitality, the way they run their business, to the way a casino runs it, to the way a bank runs it, all of those are very, very important. So I think be adaptable and get the message right, but be true to yourself. Maybe is a good summary.
I think that's certainly been our experience of working with you, and you've always been extremely generous with your network and introductions, and bringing us together into conversations, and that's definitely been the case. And so from a leadership perspective, and I really heard you when you were talking about giving people time, when people gave you time, and that really impacted you positively. How do you balance that in your role now when you've got an EMEA-wide role? I assume that you've got lots and lots of liaison across multiple cities in Europe, and you're based in Lisbon. I imagine that there's also lots of travel, but talk to me about how you manage your teams and your stakeholders when there's a remote aspect, a geographical remoteness associated with things.
Good question, and I'm still working on that, and I think that's a current thing also from a society perspective. So I think COVID really helped push that agenda forward, and I think we're all still learning a lot about it. So some folk, when I was in California, we had a neighbor. He's been working with Dell for 15 years remotely, so clearly he's mastered it. But there's not many people like that I know of. Most of the firms really want to see people and want to be present. So I think for me, it's about building the relationships very quickly, understanding who that person is, what they need, and getting to the point quickly. And it's easily done over a lunch or a dinner or a drink. It's a little bit harder on a virtual call. So I think it's just being about acting with intent. You've reached out, you need help. What do you really need, and how can I help you, and get to the point quickly? I think when I travel, I do make a point of meeting up with folk while I'm there. So, when I go to one city, I'll meet up with 3, 4, or 5 people that I know. Maybe there's nothing to get out of it. It's just to say hello, and build those relationships and maintain the relationships. And that's something I do struggle with, and it takes a lot of time. The remoteness has also got an element of out of sight, out of mind. So it's always important that you make yourself available, because if someone's going through a bad day and they're making decisions based on that, it'll be nice that they reached out to you first before they made a decision, or maybe you could help them make a better decision. So always being available helps. What I try and do is block out time in my mornings to always have a slot in the day that, worst case, I could just use that slot. I block out Fridays. I don't try and book any meetings on Fridays. Again, that's my emergency day. Whatever happens, we can deal with it on Friday, worst case. Time zones is a challenge, and I think you need to be hard. So I've been respectful for other people's time zones, and been a bit more flexible, but also be selfish with your time, because if you're not, you could work 24/7. The world just keeps on going. So I'm always conscious of, actually, you know what, I can't tonight, it's a family dinner or whatever it is. And I don't feel I need to be apologetic about having a life and having things to do, but be professional about it, and always offer a solution. But I can do tomorrow morning. Is that working? In terms of motivating people, also difficult, because managing people you've never met is hard. So again, it gets back to what really is the motivation, and how do we build a relationship beyond the transaction? You work for me, you're servicing client X, you're making me a revenue, but what do you really want as a person? And I think that's where JLL is very good, in that we've got a big structure around it, but it's about trying to just be open and available. What worries me is the unknown. So I don't know some of the people in the team, because there's plus 200, and I don't know if some of them are unhappy. So what I've tried to do to build a better structure, now thinking technical program manager level, I've got a level between me and all their accounts, and I'm trying to task those individuals who I trust to build those relationships. So at least that person has a relationship with the bigger machine. And it's not just, if you don't know me, then you don't have any options. There's a bigger thing that we need to do. We also spent all of last year building a community. We had monthly calls, introducing different topics, sharing opportunities, etc., to try and bring everyone together so that they, with us, we're a lot of seconded roles. So what's important for me is you work for the client, but you really are still JLL. The client's somewhere you visit, and at some point you're going to come back to the mothership. We're going to do what we do, and then you'll maybe go to another client. And having that link back to the mothership is really, really important for us. So that's how we try and manage it, but it's not easy. But having said that, I've learned so much from everybody, and I ask questions, cultural questions. Sometimes, you got to be careful, but you can learn a lot, and just understanding how that culture works sometimes is very, very, very helpful, because you can get straight to the point quite quickly.
Yeah. It's really interesting. One of the points that you mentioned earlier, and really that kind of echoes through your response to that question is and I always think this is a huge topic within real estate and construction, is all about your network. Now, you've said that obviously you've not come from a long line of, surveying or project managers, which a lot of surveyors traditionally, in the olden days maybe, traditionally would do. But network is really important in this industry. How does that, first of all, does building a network come naturally to you? Because what I find from speaking to a lot of leaders is it seems very natural, but it's really not. And how do you, and I think this is going to be really helpful for people watching this who are thinking about careers or are in their careers and they're trying to figure out how to grow their network. And how have you gone about that? And how do you keep up to date with your network, and how do you grow it?
So good question. And I'm actually a very shy person naturally, and I don't like networking. Let's be honest. So what I did was I managed to convince myself that there was things I needed to do to work around it. So I'll give you an example. If I went to a conference, it was very comfortable for me to go listen to all these interesting speakers, learn lots of things. At tea breaks or lunch breaks, grab our phone, check on some important email, because God knows if the world didn't get, a response. And one day I reflected and I thought, what's the point in coming here? I might as well just YouTube it. There was no benefit being in this space. So my promise to myself was no phone, switch it off. You're here for the day. Be selfish with your time and focus on why you're here, whatever that conference is about, and make a point of talking to lots of people. And the goal was 20 people a day. So it didn't actually matter who it was, and it didn't matter the outcomes. The first time I did it, it was hard. I sweated and I struggled. But every time I did it, it just got easier and easier. And it taught me just to develop a habit of just getting to that high. How are you? Oh, did you enjoy this? How do you break into little chit chat? Yeah. And some of those relationships have proved worthwhile, because 3 months later, I needed something, or they needed something, and then they reached out. So I forced myself to find a way that I could do it that I was comfortable with, but I was natural at doing it. I'm not the type to, follow up every single person. Let's go for lunch and network and super, I'm not that type of person. So if I did it, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't like it, and I'd be very out of my comfort zone for too long. That was one thing. The other thing that I do is, by sharing little stories with people, as in, hey, you need help here, it breaks the ice. And once somewhere in my head that ice is broken, then it's not really that scary anymore. So I've worked out what my tipping point is and how I force myself to get over that point, and then it's comfortable. In terms of maintaining the relationships, that's hard. If you just looked at LinkedIn and how many people you've connected with, there's a lot. And you can't speak to every person every day, every year. So I think it's just about being present and available. And some people you lose along the way. I would also say at an early stage in career, you do meet so many people, and just absorb and meet and put a bit of effort in so that they know who you are. And in the beginning, you have to do more chasing. You have to do more reminding. As you get more senior, maybe more people are chasing for your time. And again, it comes back to give them some time, and you don't know who they know, and at the end of the day, it all works out. But I try not meet people and build a network based on transactions. Yeah. Just because you're the boss of something doesn't mean I need to be your friend. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I feel there has to be a chemistry. There has to be a common need, something that brought us together, either a hobby or a sport, or we lived in the same country. There has to be something. If there's no story, then it's very transactional. It's like a Yellow Pages.
I think that's really, helpful from a practical perspective. Put your phone away when you're going to a networking event. It does not come naturally to me whatsoever. So I have to really force myself in that, first of all, to put myself in that situation in the first place. Yeah. And then to maximize that, it's not an opportunity, but just to maximize the event and just open up conversation with new people. It just doesn't, despite moving around every 2 years as a child, it still doesn't come naturally to me to open up that dialogue. So, yeah. So if we look at your career, and you touched on some of the most influential times in terms of, or kind of moments in terms of people giving you time, what is there somebody in your career that they may well not have any idea of? They might be really, really small moment, or innocuous to many other people, but is there a particularly influential person in your career, past or present, who has had such an impact on you? And if so, you don't need to name names if you don't want to, but if so, who are they in terms of the role they had, and what impact has that had on you, and how does that affect you now?
Oof, there's been so many, but I'll give you one, because it's so. Maybe another way to answer the question is, every person that I've met, at some point I've learned something from them. Somebody's given me something, and I remember their face, and I remember that moment, and I remember how they made me feel. And sometimes it's by watching them, because they were doing something that had nothing to do with me, sometimes not. And the example is, I was going into Goldman's one morning really early. Offices were closed, it was dark. And anyway, wandering in, and one of the meeting rooms still had a light on. And it was like 6:30 in the morning. So I wandered past, and it was a guy from the US who had come to us to stay for a few years, because we had a big project we were running. And I knocked on the door. He's like, "Oh, come in." And I'm like, "What are you doing here so early in the morning?" And he's like, "We're meeting with a cladding company." And at that point, we were doing a big HQ for Goldman. So it was a big project. And he's like, we've got an issue with the cladding system. And he had the cladding catalog out with little samples, and he was on YouTube, he was doing research. And I'm like, you're the project director. And he goes, "We need to make a decision today and move this forward. Otherwise, the project will be delayed over budget, blah, blah, blah. I need to know more than the supplier, the contract, and everybody else in that room to nail it." And for me, that was a real moment of ownership. It was a real moment of a little bit of sacrifice, because this was important to the project. But what it was important was, it was his job to get it over the line. And he took ownership, and he acted with intent. And I think back to the conference point, why are you here? What do you really want to get out of that experience? What should you be getting out of it? What is your role or objective, or whatever it is? And then act with intent and do it. And ignore the world for 2-3 hours. Maybe the family didn't have breakfast with you this morning. Maybe that's okay, as long as you're not doing it every day. But go with intent. And that story really sticks with me. I got lots of those, but every time I'm in a situation, a story like that comes to mind. I remember how that made me feel. It was like a movie moment. And for now on, that's how I will behave in those situations. So maybe there's one example. But individuals, back to the point of, I've met a lot of people who have been so awesome. So I don't want to mention any names, because I'm going to forget, and it's just, we're not at the Oscars. So
no, look, and I suppose it's more the takeaway from that I was interested in, as opposed to an individual, because I really feel that some of the actions that people unknowingly do, just through who they are and their style, and maybe what they've taken from other people, it's that I think can be the biggest influence in somebody else's career. So that's why I was interested now. So I suppose the final question I've got for you is really around, what you think some of the biggest trends or the challenges or the opportunities that our sector, being real estate and construction, faces in over the next few years.
Sure, big question.
It is a big question. Don't feel free to answer every single aspect.
No. So I would strongly recommend you read the JLL research, because I think they cover all the points. But my personal view, the world has gone a little bit crazy. COVID really opened up a Pandora's box of stuff, and I don't think the world and the industry and individuals were ready for it. So taking that as that's my perspective of where the world is. We've seen a shift in working remotely is now starting to come back. We need people in the office 2 days, 3 days a week. We are in 21 countries in terms of the team, in terms of residents, where they live. And clients are starting to get a bit more particular with where those locations are because of where they are. So the remote working model is working less. It's more about flexible working, not remote working. So I think there's a subtle difference there. Depending on what market you're in, we were in Paris a few weeks ago, and they've got a very aging structure. Everybody in client side does everything. They don't outsource a lot, but those folk are starting to retire. So it feels like, picking France as an example, they're shifting to more of an outsourced model, but culturally it's a big shift for them. It's going to take them a long time, and the industry will not react quickly. So, from my perspective, that's exciting, but we need to be patient. The UK is going through a lot of change just in terms of IR35, how that whole space works with contractors versus full-time. I'm seeing more people prefer full-time, but people don't see it as a job for life anymore. They don't see it as job security because there's more volatility in the world, but they like what that experience brings them. Others are the opposite. They love contracting and want to do more of it. So there's a bit of a shift there. I think my generation and above, we're at a certain point in that cycle and probably have different viewpoints and perspectives of what we want from work. So I love working remotely. But I've got a lot of graduates, younger folk who need to be in the office. Back to my example, I would never have learned the aluminium cladding lesson working remotely. But because I was in an office, I was inspired. And he didn't do it because he wanted to show me. He was just leading by example. So I think the younger, more, I want to grow my network, I want to do all of that, have to be in the office. So I think it sounds idyllic to work somewhere remotely and exotic, but when you're in your 20s, early 30s, that's when you need to be out and about meeting and greeting. So there's a balance there of city versus country life. And I think the balance isn't always right. We're seeing younger folk coming with bigger expectations around salaries and also around the lifestyle. Hey, I want to work from, I don't know, Canary Islands, and I'm not sure why I need to come to the office. And, I want to work 3 days a week because I like gardening. And there's lots of funky, interesting conversations, which I love, the diversity and flexibility. And where we can, we'll always accommodate. But I think expectations aren't in the box anymore. When I was going through my RICS as an example, it was a very well-traveled path that everybody followed. And I'm not sure the path is as clear as anymore. And I think with folk like me now working remotely, not everybody sees all the work I do every day. So my ability to influence and inspire or show people how not to do it is limited because people only see me when I'm on the call. So now it's you and I. No one else is benefiting from this call yet. At some point it'll be published and it'll be useful, hopefully.
I'm sure it'll go viral, within minutes.
In a positive way, yes. And then the other challenges, I think, are the clients themselves. So they are facing more currently budget constraints. Portfolio pipelines are limited, so their ability to hire and to spend is restricted. So they're squeezing more and more out of people. And we see that every day. Some sectors are doing better, some are not doing that well, but we're not in a recession. It's not banking crisis time now. So it just means we've had many good years, and back to the younger generation, they've never lived through a bad time, as in economically. They've lived on a really good wave. And I believe you judge people when they're down, you don't judge them when they're up. So now it's a question of, character, it's, resilience, and all of those things that I think we took for granted in my generation. We would just go get a job and sort yourself out and get on with it. I'm not saying that was right, but now it's a lot more emotional and there's a lot more stuff going around it. I think the world's also become a lot more diverse. So one of the positive things I'm seeing, which I love, is more females in the industry. When I joined, it was all men. We would all, well, I didn't, but there was a lot of people smoking in the office, and then we'd go for drinks afterwards to the pub and, talk like a bunch of guys would. And that has definitely changed. So in some ways, I miss the camaraderie and I miss the social aspects, because people seem to have yoga and other activities to do rather than just go to the bar. But that's also important. And then I think finally, what excites me but scares me is technology. So the industry itself is not the most progressive when it comes to technology, let's say. There's hundreds of products out there that purport to do really exciting things, but ultimately our industry is human-based. And how do we adapt the technology to suit our working styles and make us more powerful versus getting the technology to do our job for us? And it comes down to how much of the work we do can be taken away by technology, and how much of the work could we do better at, because now we've got free time to be humans and do what we're good at and consult. So I think the shift to consulting, the shift away from tactical, repetitive work will continue. I just don't know where that balance is. And I fear that one day I won't have a job because of technology, but I think I've got control over that to a degree. And the challenge for me then is if I'm in a role that will one day become obsolete, now's the time to reposition myself. Now's the time to retrain. Now's the time to build a network. So I would say we've got to always look ahead, but live in the present and learn from the past. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, that is literally the best end of any sentence, especially for a podcast. I would love, and I might tap you up about this in the coming months, but I think that there's a real opportunity to have a kind of round table with some leaders in the business around technology, and whether it's going to be a disruptor or an enabler, or whatever that might be. And I think, because I think it's obviously, I mean, it's not rocket science, but obviously it's a huge topic. But I think it's really interesting to learn from different leaders in different organisations in different sectors within our sector, but whether it be client side or tech or financial services or whatever it may be, and how people are using technology to enable them to be more efficient, but also the flip side of that, and how they're managing that with their teams and making sure that people don't feel, insecure about, the future, or, so I might tap you up about that in the coming months. Of course. So I think
quick question to you, I suppose, and this is my assumption, is, job applications used to be through agencies, direct to a human HRE type person. A lot of it is now web-based. Yeah. And my perspective is AI, keywords, tags, whatever you want to call it, is filtering those applications. And are we at risk of we just not getting to the right people, because the role is about the talent and the personality and the cultural fit, but we're actually just ticking boxes? And have you seen that in your role and what you do?
I mean, I think that's a really, really important question, because we haven't replaced any of our recruitment process with tech. So we haven't replaced any of our screening, any of our engagement, any of our CV feedback or anything with tech. What we have used, so we are still, doing the old school, rightly or wrongly. I'm sure there are other people that are, massively using tech to make improvements, but for us, we are very old school in terms of that human connection and the network and building that rapport, because actually what I always say is speak to people, because it's the hesitations that you want to explore. It's not what they say that's important, it's those hesitations. Yeah. It's those it's what they don't want that actually is going to make you be a better recruiter for that candidate or for that client, because you'll understand the nuances of human behavior.
Exactly.
And I don't think that that can be picked up through AI. That said, what we are starting to use tech for is to streamline some of the less human elements. So advert writing, formatting CVs, so that the end customer experience is really, really important, as well as invested in technology to gain insight into the customer experience. I'm becoming obsessed with customer experience. And at the moment, until about a month ago, we've not been able, it's all been anecdotal. It's all been, you know what, Dennis was really pleased with how that went, or actually Dennis said that we fell down here. It's anecdotal, whereas what I've done is I've invested in tech to really capture the customer experience, whether that be candidate or client, post Capstone interview, post their interview with a client, once we've placed them, once they've been there for a year. Yes, that's not to replace the human element, but actually it's about gathering as much. I kind of think that if there's an element of tell an anonymous system how you really feel about the service, sometimes they're going to be more honest than telling the individual that's delivered that service.
Agreed.
So what I'm trying to do is introduce technology to better our human interaction, I would say. That's where we're at the moment. So, you know, and to get our team, you know, and to take away aspects of our team's role that can be automated without losing the customer experience, and get them doing what they're really good at for more of the time and what they enjoy, you know. So
and
it's a scary
I think that's
one,
where it should go, but it is scary. So no, good answer. And you know, remember I think for me that the key in your space specifically is it's somebody's life. You know, they've put their family's future in your hands to put them in a place where they're going to be safe, happy, and thrive, you know, without being too cheesy. And that's what worries me with the technology pieces. It doesn't see any of that. It's literally, it's like those little things where you got the words and you've got to draw the squiggly lines and join, and that's all it does. So I think there's a lot that it can do from a data and enabling and a process and a workflow perspective. And we do a lot of that now with program management, but it still does not replace the human.
No, and I think that this is what I say to my team all the time, is that we are, and by the way, we do not get it right every time. You know, everybody in the business, we do not get it right. And some of that is because we place so much emphasis on the human reaction, the human interaction, and we don't have the time to answer every single email, every single application. And that actually keeps me up at night, because actually that's where I want to use tech to, you know, give people that feedback so that they know that they're not right, so that they know they haven't got the opportunity. And I think that we can fall short if we're trying to do all of that in person, when actually, and we end up putting it off to the point where we don't do it, or where there's too long a period. Whereas actually, it's such an emotive time in somebody's life. You need to know whether you're going to be suitable. So it's always a balance. Listen, that's been brilliant. It's been brilliant for people, you know, who are going to be watching this and learning how somebody like you got to where you've got to and what you've taken from it. So thank you so much. And I will speak to you again soon, I'm sure.